Alright, so engine's torn down, cleaned up. I took all the debris out of it, kind of cleaned the head surfaces up so that the head gaskets will have a good chance to seal up and everything. I found a few missing parts, and so I went ahead and bought some replacements on eBay. I didn't have head bolts in it, so I just bought some cheap head studs and some other replacement parts, and we'll kind of walk through all those in a few minutes. But the biggest issues I found were the rod bearings. Looked like they were kind of worn in some spots, so I bought another set of rod bearings, and I'll kind of just walk through my plans to put this engine back together with the cam, springs, and different upgrades I'm going to do to it. Okay, so we're just going to walk through this. The big hitter we got is the Sloppy Stage 2 Jegs camshaft here. This is the 200/582 cam. I'll go back and post the specs on that thing. These are the pack valve springs that everyone uses to go with this cam. You can just pick these up off of eBay or something for a pretty inexpensive price. So those are the two big changes I'm going to make. Everything else should just be maintenance type stuff. I got a new set of Cleveite rod bearings for it, just to go ahead and swap those out, get rid of that worn out stuff that's going on with the rod bearings that are currently in the engine. And the rest of it's all pretty basic stuff. Just oil filter, oil pressure sensor, because that thing was broken on the back side of the engine when I got it. I guess this could be a modification. So I got a set of China head studs for this thing. So these are just the eBay knockoff, well, I won't call them knockoff. They're supposedly ARP head bolts. I don't know what they are. They're the cheapest thing I could find on eBay, with the 12-point nuts on them and all that. This thing was missing the head bolts, the torque to yield factory bolts, when I bought it, so this was almost as cheap as buying a set of factory torque to yield bolts. So I was like, well, we'll just put these China head studs on there and let it go on down the road. And I broke the power steering pump pulley, taking it off, so I just bought a replacement Dorman unit, which is supposed to be just a stock slide-on replacement to get that thing fixed. I now have a power steering puller and installer to put that thing back on, and we should be ready to go. So I'm just go ahead and start putting the cam in this engine and changing out those springs and bearings and get this thing cleaned up and ready to roll. So I took the top ring off of this #1 piston and fit it down into #1 cylinder. So ideally what we want to do is change this top ring to where it has a gap in it that's somewhere between 28 and 30 thousandths according to the internet. So you square it up in the hole using the piston. It just seats on the #2 ring, gives you a nice flat surface there. Square with the face of the block, and right now I can fit about 21 thousandths in there. So I've got to open that up to do 28, so we got a few thousandths to go. You guys can do that math. So there's guys that say you can go through and you can take the ring itself, and you can take a file and you can go through and try to like count your strokes and file the thing back, but you can see this would just take forever and this is boring. So this is why you always keep the guard on your grinder. It makes a perfect ring filer vise bench mount thing. So what I'm going to do is turn this grinder on, and then I'm going to take my ring and just touch it to the inside edge of this grinding disc. The nice part about these grinders is they've got a button on the side of them. You can actually turn the grinder on and then lock it in the on position. Set this ring back in the hole, square it back up, and just like that, 27 thousandths clearance. Way faster than sitting here with a little file all day, just whittling away at it. So I'll go through and knock the rest of these out, and then when the bearings show up, we can put this engine back together. So I bought a new timing chain as well, just because it seemed like maybe cheap insurance, and this one seemed like it was pretty loose, but a lot of guys online say it's super normal for them to be really loose like that, and you shouldn't worry about it. But I think it was like 12 bucks on Rock Auto to just put a replacement chain in it. I'm not sure the chain's going to fix anything. It probably needs a chain and sprockets just to make sure that if the teeth are worn, then you're actually cleaning up all the worn out parts. You're cleaning up the teeth and the sprockets and the chain. Anyway, I got a chain. I'm going to put a chain in it. So I just pre-align the crank being in the straight up position, and I pre-align the camshaft so that this dot lines up with the crankshaft dot. Hopefully that looks close. And it's still pretty sloppy. Maybe it's not quite as bad as it was. Alright, cam's in. I'll start loading this thing up with some pistons now. Alright, so next step here, I'm going to change out these valve springs. I'm just going to put these pack springs in there that I got. These are the pack 1218 springs we talked about earlier. To do this, there's a lot of guys that make their own valve spring tools and all that sort of stuff out of old broken wrenches and everything. I just happen to have a valve spring compressor around, so I'm just going to use it and kind of roll through here and change all these out while the heads are actually off the engine and there's nothing to worry about. Famous last words, that didn't work very well. Alright, luckily I found both of those on the floor real quick. I guess those must have been stuck from years of service. Alright, so while we're here changing out valve springs, got the spring off, it's a good idea to go ahead and change out the valve stem seals. These are just some of those Viton seals. I picked these up off of eBay from some distributor. A lot of guys recommend these, said that they're good. So the consensus online is that the brown and the green are actually different materials. And the brown is a polyacrylate. So actually provide a better, longer lasting seal over the exhaust system versus the green seal, which is supposed to be just a nitrile type material. I guess the same stuff my gloves are made out of here. I'm going to put the green ones on the intake side where it stays cooler and put the brown ones on the exhaust side. Alright, so back to the block at this point. The block's cleaned up, pistons and rings are in. You guys saw that go back together. I put these cheap China head studs in here, just the fake eBay ARP studs, and just use a Allen wrench to kind of run them down in there. I got these Victor Rianez head gaskets, and they claim that they're for a 5.7 GM car 97 to 01 here. If you can see that or not. So here's the part number to 61104030. The weird part is that, so this says, yep, 5.7 LS1 that would fit for this car. The head gaskets are actually marked with a 4853 marking here, which is kind of concerning. That would indicate that the bore diameter in that hole in the gasket's actually smaller than the hole in the cylinder here. So I think these are got a 3.90 bore, and whatever the 4853 bore is a little bit smaller. These fit well, but they're definitely a smaller diameter than the actual block bore is, which may be okay if the piston stays centered. My concern is that the piston's got essentially a 0 deck height when it comes up, and it could actually, once it's compressed down in there, it could actually kiss the lip of that gasket up inside of there. I don't know, I might do some research on these and figure out if other guys have run them and had good luck, or if somebody says they've got a problem. The other thing is, too, they're supposed to work with these heads. I've got these 806 heads, which have the notch in them. So the head has actually got a notch cast into it. And these gaskets are supposed to work with these heads, but I'm not sure that they will. Okay, so my concern is that this notch in the cylinder head is not going to allow the sealing ring here on the bottom to actually seal up. It might actually cause some sort of water leak or something. So I think what I'm going to do is just take some Play-Doh and stick it on here. What this should show is the indentation of the high spot cast into that cylinder head. So you get a really good visual of where that indentation is there. So you can zoom in on this. So you can see where it's actually not going to sit on this black line here. It's going to have a gap in there, which I think is okay. It does look like it's going to seal across this head surface here, and you can see where the edge of the water port is covered up here, sticking up a little bit high. I assume the next one's going to start over here the same way. So this thing might actually work, I guess, underneath here. Yeah, same thing on the underside of the block here. There's nothing, there's no holes under there, so I guess these things will actually work. All right, I'll go ahead and put these on here. Looks like I'm missing these 5 studs across the top on each side too. I think I've got those in a bag. I'll put those on in a second. Okay, so I'm trying to finish this engine and get it back together today. I got a host of parts for it that I kind of found gaskets that were missing, bolts and hardware that were missing, some knock sensors were missing. So I'll kind of just walk through what I got and then what I'm going to put on. So I kind of just show you guys what I got for the stock gaskets and stuff to put this thing back together with, and to get this thing back to like a regular looking LS. And then I'll show you my plans for my turbo parts, that I'm going to have an oil feed and oil return, what I plan to do there. So here he goes. Okay, just stuff to get the motor back together. There's a Egr Block Off Plate. I got this just off of eBay. So this is a SR brand. I got some water pump bolts, and this stuff all came from ICT Billet. Some exhaust bolts, because I didn't have any. I was missing the coolant crossover bolts. I found some stainless steel ones from an eBay seller. Again, eBay, single rocker arm with like an uprated trunnion on it, and a bolt to hold that down. There's a stack of gaskets for the rear main. There's some new water pump gaskets and stuff for the front cover. I already put the front seal in the front cover. There's a harness for the knock sensor, and then 2 actual knock sensors because this engine didn't have any. And we'll slide over here, just 2 GM exhaust manifold gaskets, the multi-layer ones. They're supposed to be reusable. A Felpro intake valley gasket with the 2 seals for the knock sensors there. And then for the fun stuff, Outcast AutoWorks makes these pretty badass looking mounts for the LS motors to sit in that Crown Vic front frame cradle there. So these are supposed to enable the LS1 or LS series engines to just drop right into that Crown Vic front mount and hopefully work with this truck and not have any clearance issues. So pretty excited to get those put in place. Some eBay fuel rails here. I forget which brand these were, but some other guys had recommended these as having good luck with these fuel rails. So got some red ones to kind of church it up a little bit. Slide on down here, they're eBay log style cast iron turbo manifold. This is for the like 5.3 and the Chevy Silverado truck. So that's kind of the same position I wanted for the turbo in this truck. It just kind of gets it up out of the way. It clears the AC compressor, it clears all the factory running gear on the front of the 5.3, which is pretty cool. So hopefully that works out well for me. VS Racing 7875 Turbo. I just bought this direct from VS Racing. They seem to have like the best deal on it here, so we'll get that all plumbed up, ready to go. And then some Vibrant Performance Dash 4 line for the oil feed line. This is an adapter for the side of the block to get you 2 1/8" NPT fittings coming out to feed oil to it. So I've got one Dash 4 fitting here for the output and then one for the inlet on the actual turbo itself. So I'll end up just plugging up one of those lines for right now. Just some push to lock ends for those, and then the same thing but in a Dash 10 variety for the drain. We have a Dash 10 weld-in bung here, and then some push to lock swivel fittings for the end of the Dash 10 hose to make it all drain back into the oil pan where we need it. So with that, we'll go ahead and start zipping this thing back together. So I won't spend a whole lot of time going over how to put all the factory type gaskets and seals back in this thing. I'm sure that's been done like 1,000 times on YouTube. So I'll just kind of put this thing back together and kind of fast forward the stock component type stuff until I get to like the turbo type stuff that's fun. And we'll slow down and kind of go through that step by step and see what kind of issues I run into here. So I've seen guys do this both ways. I guess the question is, where do I want the fuel feed line to come in? I'm going to do a fuel pressure regulator somewhere, probably on the firewall on one side or the other. I don't really have a preference. I guess the turbo's here, maybe it's easier to put the fuel pressure regulator back on this side and kind of feed this back corner of the rail. So then that means I'm going to move this plug back to the rear and put the crossover hose back here in the front. I think that'll be okay. I think there's enough clearance and stuff there, unless we get into some issue where there's not enough clearance in the firewall or something. So I'll go ahead and set it up now to put the crossover tube in the front. So these rails were LS1 specific, so I think the only difference in the rails that they sell are typically the standoff heights here in these little brackets, and all that does is accommodate the injector height. So the trucks have got a shorter injector. The LS1 and the LS6 have the longer style injector on them, so they need a taller standoff here for the rail to sit up a little bit higher. Obviously, if you have an LS2, LS3, you're going to want a different style standoff here to make sure you order the correct fuel rails to go with your application there. But it looks like this, for being just a quick eBay purchase, looks like everything lines up really nicely and fits really well. Of course, we won't know until we start it up and actually try to pressurize the fuel system if there's any sort of leaks or any sort of issues or anything, but so far this looks like it's going to work out really, really well. So in order to finish this engine reassembly here, I need to get the oil pan taken off and then put this drain hole or drain bung back in it. So as far as the factory gaskets and stuff goes, I still need to get the oil pan gasket off and align and get it back on. So it seems like an opportune time to go ahead and take the oil pan off and then weld this -10 bung back in there, and then put the oil pan back on with a new gasket and seal everything back up once and for all. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of quickly go through and take this -10 hose and mark where I think it would go, where I think it'll fit. So it's going to come out of the turbo here on the bottom, and I kind of make sure it doesn't have any sort of issues. It looks like I want to make sure I'm clear of the motor mount and I'm not going to hit any sort of this exhaust when it comes down here. And then of course I got the subframe that's going to come down this direction. Hopefully this oil pan fits with the subframe. It seems like there's a lot of unknowns here. Yeah, so I might just go to the back of the oil pan back here and put this bung in the rear section. It looks like it gives me plenty of clearance for that that hose there. That drain's not going to hit anything hot and not going to have any problems working around anything. Alright, so here's the pan off, ready to go. Here's a little X that I made on the side about where I want to pop this bung in here. So the bung has got this little step lip on the back of it. This is just a universal bung I bought off of Summit. But you can see the top section of it here. This is the part that's actually going to countersink inside of the pan. And so my dying calipers here, you can see that that's about 0.72 inches there. So it's about 3/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is just take a 3/4 inch drill bit and pack this thing full of some paper towels and rags and stuff, and pop a hole in the side of it, and that'll let this piece, this -10 bung, if I can get it to focus here, so that'll let this -10 bung actually just sit in there and give me a nice place to let me weld around the outside of it. Perfect. Alright, oil pan's back on. Of course, that nasty cast aluminum has all this trash in it. It tries to come to the surface whenever you try to weld it, so it kind of makes like this big fat boogity looking weld, but I think it'll be alright. So I got a push to lock -10 hose fitting here, so I'm just going to put this on. So that way it's upside down now, but the oil will run out of the turbo and then back down to the pan where it can run back into the pan where we need it. Alright, I'll turn this thing over and we'll start on the feed side. Okay, so engine's still upside down here. And so what I'm going to do for the oil feed is just use this existing, I think this is the oil pressure feed port here. Of course on the LS1 this isn't really used. I think it's only actually used as an oil pass-through, and it's actually just plugged up here. So I got this kit from ICT Billet. This just came off of Summit Racing, and what it does is it just replaces this block here with a block with a flow-through inside of it here, and then it has two 1/8 inch NPT holes that allow you to, you know, plug this or put some sort of port here, whatever you want to do for an oil pressure sensor. In this case, we're going to use it for a turbo oil feed. So the kit comes with some new hardware and 2 plugs and an O-ring. Pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to use this with one of the plugs to plug off one of the ports in this block, because I only need one, and I'm going to use a 1/8 inch NPT to -4 AN adapter fitting, also from ICT billet. So I'm going to set up this ICT billet block like this, so this one side of it's plugged, the other side of it has a 4 AN fitting coming out of it now. It's a pretty nice kit. It's just got a machined O-ring slot in it here. It comes with a nice O-ring. So I'm just going to install this in this kit and go ahead and take off the other OEM plate that's in this thing and get this nice O-ring piece and screw it in. So this turbo comes with a adapter here for the drain line, and it just goes from a standard, I think, T4 drain line to a -10 AN for a drain. But it looks like in order to put this fitting on, when it's actually mounted to the turbo, is going to be a hard thing to do. You can't get a wrench in this little narrow slot here. So we're just going to mock this up for now, but I think I'll have to put the fitting on first, and then just put a socket in here and attach this drain fitting to the turbo itself once the hose is already in place. And with those two connections made, the drain hose is in place and ready to go. So now I'm going to start on the top, and for this, and for the feed line here, there's just 2 through holes that go to like a feed line adapter, which I'm not going to use. This has got an 1/8 inch NPT hole tapped on top of it. So again, I'm going to use a 1/8 inch NPT to -4 AN adapter and just put this directly right in the top of the turbo here and let that serve as the feed line. And I'm just going to put a 90-degree swivel fitting on it to go to the hose and let the feed hose kind of just come along this way and plug right in the top here. So there's plenty of space in the top to actually put to get a wrench in here to get a small fitting tightened up, so there shouldn't be a problem. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this pipe sealant on these threads here. So that should be good, and I'll go ahead and put a -4 feed line together to connect those 2 -4 AN fittings that we got on here now. Okay, so those previous fittings didn't really work out for this oil hose. I ended up trying to heat it and make the push connect fittings work. And you can see that the metal braiding just kind of went crazy, and then the inside got all nasty. And so I'm just going to cut this off and redo it with some connect fittings that are actually for this steel braided hose, which I have here. And I just bought these inexpensive units off of eBay from, I think it was like Color Fittings or colorfittings.com or something. Same fittings, just got one with like a 30 or a 45-degree angle on it, and then a 90 go on top of the turbo. So I'll go ahead and assemble these and then kind of pre-route this hose where I want it and mark it, cut it, and then put the fittings on at the end. So the hose is going to go from the oil feed on the turbo, and it's just going to run along this fuel rail here, and then it's going to kind of duck around the back because the transmission is going to bolt up to the engine. And I'll try to keep it tucked in pretty nicely on the bottom, and then mark it, cut it, and then put this fitting in. So what I'm going to do here is just take some of this chalk marker and mark. So what I'm going to do is make sure that this hose is seated 100% into the fitting end, and then go ahead and mark this with the indicator here. This is just chalk marker, so it'll wipe right off. But the idea is as we tighten this thing down, if we see this thing start to kind of move out and this gap start to open up between the mark and the fitting, we'll know that, hey, this fitting is pulling off the end of the hose and isn't actually making a good seal here. Okay, here's one last tip for you guys. When putting these fittings together, they sell some specialty like lubricant you can put on these things, and I don't know how well worth your time it is to go through and try to buy that stuff or order extra stuff. So what I recommend you do is go into your dad's nightstand and get some of his specialized personal lubricant and put a few drops of that on the tip of your fitting. Per the instructions on the bottle. And then go ahead and put these together. And as this tip goes down into the hose receptacle here, it'll make things glide right in. I'm using these approved anodized AN fitting wrenches here. They're universal. Okay, so that hose is hooked up now, so we got an oil feed coming off this new junction block, and then it goes straight up to the turbo, and we got oil going to the turbo, and then we got oil going from there back into the drain pan, so we'll call this plumbing finished and ready to go.